Today, I'm going to be talking not about JavaScript or Beyond Tellerrand, but the expanding dark forest and generative AI. So this talk is going to be about writing on the web, trust, and human relationships. So like small fish. And inevitably, AI. I am very sorry to be one of the AI people here. We can all do a big AI detox after, but we do have to engage with the topic for a little while, As a footnote, this talk is only up to date as of like a week ago. So everything I say about the current state of AI might end up being completely irrelevant in a minute. There's even an OpenAI event happening at about 7 p.m. our time that might like delegitimize a bunch of my points. But as of now, this is all up to date. Okay, so first some context about who I am and why I'm up here. My name is Maggie. I look like this on the web. I'm a designer at a company called Elicit, and we make research tools for scientists and academics to help them search through and understand the scientific literature. And we use language models, AI, to do that. So every day, I am thinking about the difficulties of building and designing with AI in a way that is reliable and accurate and responsible, because for science, you have to have really high standards for this stuff. So that's important context. Second, I'm also what we call very online. This means I live on Twitter, sadly now X, and I write a lot on my personal blog, and I hang out with other people who do the same. And we sort of write essays back and forth to each other, like we're 18th century men of letters, like as if our research is really important. And I've made lots of really real friends being a sincere human on the web. This has been an overwhelmingly positive experience for me, and I want others in the future to have that experience. And lastly, before tech, I studied cultural anthropology, and I think this gives me a lot of useful perspectives and frameworks and tools to think about culture and social behavior on the web. So a little housekeeping. This QR code, if you scan it, will take you to all my slides and notes and links and stuff for this presentation. So don't feel like you have to quickly take photos of nice slides or like jot down notes. You can just go here, and I'll show this again at the end. So here's what I'm going to talk about. We are first going to talk about the dark forest theory of the web. We are then going to talk about the current state of generative AI, as of a week ago. We're going to ask, why is this a problem? I'm going to lay out some hypothetical problems, and at the end, we can question whether they're legitimate or not. And then lastly, I'm going to lay out some possible futures of how we might deal with these hypothetical problems. So to explain the dark forest theory of the web, I first have to explain the dark forest theory of the universe. So this is a theory that tries to explain why we haven't found intelligent life in the universe yet. Right? Here we are in the universe, the pale blue dot. And as far as we know, we are the only intelligent life around. For about 60 years now, we've been beaming out messages into space, trying to find other intelligent beings. But we haven't heard anything back yet. So the big question is, why? Dark forest theory says that it's because the universe is like a dark forest at night. It's a place that seems quiet and lifeless, because if you make noise, the predators will come eat you. If you draw attention to yourself, you will be attacked and destroyed. So it stands to reason that all the other intelligent civilizations either died out or learned to shut up, and we don't know which one we are yet. So the web version builds off this concept. This was a theory proposed by Yancey Strickler in 2019, and Yancey described what it feels like to be in the public spaces of the web right now. And he pointed out two main, let's call them vibes, okay? The first is that the web can often feel like a very lifeless, automated place devoid of humans. So here we are on the web, right? And we naively are writing a bunch of very sincere, authentic accounts of our lives and experiences and inner worlds. And we're trying to find other intelligent people who share our beliefs and interests. But what we hear back doesn't sound very authentic and human. We end up feeling surrounded by content that's authored by bots and marketing automations and growth hackers pumping out generic clickbait with ulterior motives. So we have all seen this stuff, right? This is like low-quality listicles, like productivity rubbish, growth hacking advice, like banal motivational quotes, dramatic clickbait. Like all of this might as well be automated, even if there are original humans behind it. They are rarely trying to communicate sincere and original thoughts. They are mostly trying to get you to click and rack up views for ad revenue. And this flood of low-quality content that we've all been living in makes us retreat away from the public spaces of the web, because it's very costly to spend time and energy wading through this. This phenomenon is also sometimes called dead internet theory, meaning like all the humans on the web have died off and all that's left are like bots posting to each other and commenting back and forth, and that 90% of the web is like no longer humans doing anything. But I like the dark forest concept or metaphor a little bit more because it captures a second vibe we have going on, and that is unnecessarily antagonistic behavior at scale. So when we are putting all our signals out to other humans, we risk becoming a target, right? Specifically, the Twitter mob might come and eat us. There's a term on Twitter called getting main charactered. Who here knows what that is? Okay, not too many. Who here has ever been main charactered? Good, no one. Okay, we've all dodged that bullet so far. Okay, so for those that don't know, every day there is one main character on Twitter, and your goal is to not be it, because they are the person getting piled on for saying the wrong thing. This is a good example. This was a viral tweet from October of 2022. We're going to call her Garden Lady. That's how she goes by on Twitter. And she just posted this tweet talking about how much she loves her husband and how every morning she sits in the garden with him talking for hours and drinking coffee. Isn't this wonderful? Well, no one on Twitter thought so. So their replies said things like, that's cool. I wake up every morning and fight my way through traffic for an hour to get to work. Must be nice. Or, I wake up at 6 a.m. and I go to a shift that is a minimum of 10 hours long. This is an unattainable goal for most people. She didn't say it was a goal, but okay. Or, someone else goes on about their morning routine and says, it must be nice being a trust fund baby without a care in the world. So this is the sort of generous context Twitter people will give you. I thought it was summed up well by this TikTok. I don't really care if something good happened to you. It should have happened to me instead. So this is a very dumb example, but it's indicative of the energy flows of Twitter and many of the other social media platforms we're spending our time on. Publishing to the open web makes you a target for criticism and not the constructive kind. Things you write will probably be taken out of in bad faith, out of context, and amplified to unintended audiences. And this is how we get things like cancellings and pile-ons. Jonathan Ronson wrote an entire book on this phenomenon. It's called You've Been Publicly Shamed. In it, he explored how canceling and public shaming has become a mainstay of social media, and also how it materially destroys lives. People who get piled on in this way can lose their jobs, they can be alienated from their communities, they can have emotional trauma, and this makes the public web a sincerely dangerous place to publish your true thoughts. So all of this makes it very hard to find people who are being sincere and seeking coherence and trying to build collective knowledge in public. I know this isn't what everyone wants to do with the web. Some people just want to dance on TikTok, and that is completely fine. But I'm interested in at least some part of the web enabling this kind of productive discourse and community building, and I'm expecting many people here feel the same. So, how do we cope with this? While we're wandering around the dark forests of Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and realizing we need to go somewhere safer, what we end up doing is retreating, primarily to what's called the cozy web. This was a term coined by Venkatesh Rao in direct response to the dark web theory. And Venkat pointed out that what we all started going underground somewhere safer. We ended up moving to private spaces like newsletters and personal websites where we're less at risk of attack. But even those are sometimes a bit too public. So we end up retreating even further into gate-kept private chat apps like Slack and WhatsApp and Discord. This is where most of us end up spending our time because we can build real human relationships here and express our ideas. We can say things that will be taken in good faith, and we can engage in real discussions. The problem is, none of this is searchable or indexed, right? We are hiding our collective knowledge in private databases that we don't own and control. And good luck finding anything on Discord. So, my unfortunate theory is that this dark forest is going to expand enormously because we now have what's being called generative AI. These are machine learning models, like neural networks, that can generate content that before this point in history, only humans could make, right? This is text, images, video, and audio that mimics human creations. So I'm sure people have heard of some of these popular foundation models for the different media types, right? Of course, GPT-4 and Claude for text, and Midjourney and DALL-E for image, or Runway Labs for video. ChatGPT now is infamous. I hopefully don't have to explain what ChatGPT is at this point, although I did when I first started giving this talk. But the gist is it's run by a large language model that can generate huge volumes of text in seconds. It's indistinguishable from what humans can write, and that sounds simple, but it leads to all kinds of very complex emergent capabilities. These are gorgeous images from Midjourney, all generated. And this is a video by OpenAI's Sora model. So you give it a text input, like, give me some woolly mammoths running across an icy tundra, right? And it generates a very realistic-looking video from it. This isn't from any video source. It just did this from its neural network learning. Or here's a large crowd of humans in Lagos, Nigeria. Now, you can see this is impressive. We do have to agree. But you'll also notice that these people kind of trigger that spidey sense, like, oh, something's not quite right about them. There's still an uncanny valley to it, but we can assume that once models improve a bit, that'll go away. By now, these models have been turned into hundreds of easy-to-use products, right? They don't require any technical skills to use. They are built into things like Adobe Photoshop and Notion and GitHub. And we've also seen a rise in products that specifically help people generate articles and social media posts that mimics like mediocre human content. This one is called Blaze. I've decided I want to write an article about whether plant-based meat is morally wrong. I don't think they are, but like this is good clickbait moral outrage stuff. And so it's churned out about 700 words on this, right? And now I can just publish this, which if I'm someone lobbying against plant-based meat, this is very handy. I can generate thousands of these in a day and just chuck them up on the web. This is like a hard day's advocacy, right? It just got easier. This also essentially murders Google search as we know it, unless they make some changes, because every article in the first 100 pages is just going to be all this keyword-optimized SEO kind of crap. And we, of course, have generators for every platform, right? LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, whatever. There's a specialized generator for it. These examples I'm showing have a quite simple architecture, though. They're made by feeding a very simple prompt, like write me an article about plant-based meat, into a big black mystery box of a language model. And then we get a single output, right? That's like an essay, a tweet, a video, whatever it is. But we don't have a lot of control or transparency into what's happening inside that box. And we're limited in how sophisticated we can get with these outputs. But the smart AI people have recently started to build more sophisticated ways of creating language model architectures. We've learned that if we take that same black box language model and we give it access to external tools, like being able to search the web, use a calculator, use a calendar, or write code and hit APIs, then it makes up for the fact that they aren't good at things like maths, that they don't have up-to-date web information, that they can't double-check their answers. Language models are also sometimes forgetful, and they can't hold much in memory, so we can give them access to long-term memory stores and databases that they can read and write to. And then we've also found that they perform much better on tasks if you make them reflect on their outputs and improve upon them, much like a human getting design feedback. They can think step by step in a chain of thought. They can critique themselves, they can observe on what they know, reflect on it, and then plan their next action based on that. It's very similar to crude reasoning. So this is being called the agent architecture. You tell a language model essentially to act like a central agent with tools it has access to. And then you give it a goal, and it uses each tool depending on how it thinks it's going to best achieve the goal, and then figures out how to solve the problem you've given it. When we string these all together, we can get much more sophisticated answers than a single language model call, and we're able to do more accurate and more complex tasks. So these agent architectures mean we're entering a new stage of sharing the web with non-human agents. They're very different to what we currently think of as bots. They have a lot more data about how realistic humans behave, and they're rapidly going to get more and more capable. We won't be able to tell the difference between them and real humans. Now, why is this a problem? I'm only going to focus on how this is going to affect human relationships and information quality on the web. Anything else, like how we might all end up unemployed or dead, is beyond my pay grade. So, the cost of creating and publishing content to the web just dropped to almost zero. Humans are quite expensive and slow at making content. We have to research and write and think and clumsily string words together, and then we need even more time to take breaks and eat and sleep and shower, and then we demand people pay us exorbitant hourly rates for our time. While generative models write much faster, and they don't need time off, and they don't get bored, and they cost a fraction of a cent to generate thousands of words. So given that these models are cheap, easy to use fast, and can produce a nearly infinite amount of content, it stands to reason that we are about to drown in a sea of informational garbage. Every day, marketers, SEO strategists, and optimizer bros are currently having a field day filling Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and Google with masses of keyword-stuffed, optimized, generated crap. This explosion of noise is going to make it very difficult to find quality content and hear the signal through the noise. Now, when I first wrote and performed this talk well over a year ago, this was a prediction. I was trying to convince the audience that we were about to be absolutely swamped by masses of mediocre content because it wasn't happening yet and I didn't have that much evidence. Unfortunately, I was right. And I have much more disturbing evidence than I ever wanted. So last week, a NewsGuard report came out detailing how they had found 49 entirely AI-generated but very legitimate-looking news sites, all publishing misinformation that's able to rank really well on Google. So this is actively happening. Amazon, of course, has had a surge in self-published books. The New York Times did a report on how travel guidebooks were the main category of this, ironically, something that requires being in the physical world. And so they put a bunch of these through their AI detectors, and they scored quite highly, and they found out the authors of most of these were totally made up, like generated profile images, no other evidence of them being real. And in response, Amazon has started limiting the number of self-published books you can publish per day to only 3. So you're going to have to slow down on your book writing here. The telltale phrase, as an AI language model, this shows up in a lot of responses by ChatGPT. If you search this on places like Amazon, Yelp reviews, tweets, and LinkedIn posts, it shows up quite a lot. Not very good either, just sort of very boring attempts to get engaging LinkedIn content. One of my favorite Twitter accounts at the moment is called Dead Internet at its Finest, and they collect examples of generated crap on Twitter. There's just reply sections filled with stuff like this, just like bots replying en masse with like slightly different versions of like incredible graphics, engaging storyline, immersive, congratulations on your remarkable success. Yeah, it's like LinkedIn, but with bots. That's the other one. Facebook is a whole different story. I hadn't been on it for about a decade, but then I found this paper that was published in March by 2 Stanford researchers who were looking at the surge in AI-generated spam and scam images. And they found hundreds of generative content farms running on Facebook. And these pictures showing here from their paper, each of these had over 1 million engagements. So that's people liking it, like commenting on them. And despite obviously being fake and creepy, for some reason, people are really enamored with these kind of images. And this paper sent me down a genuinely awful rabbit hole where I learned that if there's one thing that boomers on Facebook love, it's children making things and Jesus. So here is a generated AI child making a rather unbelievable Jesus sand sculpture, which has over 11,000 engagements and over 300 comments, most of them just amen, This one, a lot to unpack. A child in a slum who's made a Coca-Cola bottle Jesus. It's very entrepreneurial of him. Clearly, the spirit of capitalism is alive and well. And again, thousands of engagements, hundreds of comments. This, I cannot really explain what it is, but Crab Jesus has over 200,000 engagements and 4,000 comments. I don't know what everyone's commenting on. There are much more disturbing examples that I did not have the stomach to put on a large screen in front of people. But the examples I'm showing here, right? These are extremely unsophisticated, kind of bot-generated nonsense that we can't even understand. And we're probably going to be able to filter out and ignore the vast majority of this. But I'm more worried about a more sophisticated version of this. So let's play out a hypothetical scenario. This is Nigel. He's a real human in the world. And he's written a book called Why Nepotism is Great. And he wants to be a bookfluencer. So he spins up an agent, and he tells it to promote his book, not unlike a traditional book agent. So the agent goes to town, right? It writes and schedules a whole bunch of tweets and Facebook and LinkedIn posts based on the book's content. And it sets up a weekly newsletter and republishes all of those as articles to Medium. And it makes a set of addictive TikTok videos using Nigel's face and voice, which is something you can currently do. It makes a 20-part 4 series on YouTube of all these essays about it, right? It makes a podcast. It finds other people writing about nepotism and comments on them and engages with them to build community. right? And none of this is different to what Nigel could do on his own. But without an agent, 99% of Nigels wouldn't have the time, energy, and motivation to do this. So now, instead of 1% of people having the time and energy to be prolific self-promoters, 99% of people now have the capacity to publish this mass of content to the web. I think the scale and quality of this kind of spam is something that we are not prepared for. I expect Nigel's agent will actually be quite good at writing compelling content, possibly better than Nigel. And now imagine how this plays out at scale when political lobbying groups with specific agendas to push are doing versions of this. I think they're probably already doing it already. I have some good news, though. That's all a bit dark, right? Like, take a big breath. This might not be a problem. This is only a problem if we want to use the web for very particular purposes, like facilitating genuine human connections, or pursuing collective sense-making and building knowledge together, and ideally, grounding our knowledge of the world in reality. So if you don't care about any of these things, don't worry about generative AI. Everything will be fine. We're going to have much better TikTok videos and much more engaging content. The thing is, I'm quite keen on some of these outcomes, right? I write on the web a lot. I'm a big proponent of people publishing their own personal knowledge on the web. I bang on about digital gardens and the indie web and wikis. Yeah, indie web, woo! Everyone should be putting their knowledge online. The goal is to make the web a space for collective understanding and knowledge building. It requires us to find and share and curate highly reliable, insightful information, and I'm quite worried that generative agents threaten that. So when I talk to people about my worries, particularly AI engineers, I always get this question. They ask, why does it matter if a generative model made something rather than a human? In most cases, language models are more accurate and knowledgeable than most humans, on average, right? We have benchmarks that show this. And this is at least when it comes to like referencing well-documented facts. They frankly are better writers than most of us. And surely having more generated content on the web might actually make it a more reliable and valuable place. So like, I'm sympathetic to this point. But there are a few key differences between content generated by models versus by humans. The first is its connection to reality. The second is the social context it lives within. And finally, the potential for human relationships. I'm going to go into each of these in more detail. So first, generated content is different because it has a different relationship to reality than we do. We are embodied humans in a shared reality with like a rich embodied information, but senses coming into us, right? We read other people's accounts of this reality, and we compare it against our own, and then we write up our accounts. And we are all participating in the cycle of trying to make sense of everything together. This is like all of history and science and art and literature. This is what we're doing. And what we've done now is feed that enormous written record into a bunch of large language models. And they've encoded the patterns of it into their networks, and this has become a kind of representation of the written record of humanity. And now that model can generate text that is predictably similar to all the text it's seen before. So the tricky bit we have to figure out is how much does that generated text relate to that reality? And in some sense, it's like fully unhinged. Like the model cannot check its claims against reality because it cannot access reality. It's a bit like a fuzzy memory of reality. But it is based on what we've written about the world, but it just can't validate its claims. We politely call this hallucination, right? This is when language models say things that are not really true. It's a bit like a really smart person who's on some mild drugs and who's confused about who they are and where they are, but they're very intelligent while they're doing it. A big part of this limitation is the fact that these models only deal in language. And language is only one small part of how a human understands and perceives the world, right? We are able to perceive and reason and interact with the world via spatial reasoning and embodiment and our sense of touch and taste and sound and memory and vision and consciousness. And these are all pre-linguistic, and they live in a separate part of the brain to language. Generating text strings is not the end-all be-all of what it means to be intelligent or human. So fake humans that can only deal in language are missing a really big part of what we perceive as reality. Language models are also very different in their social context, in that they have a very strange relationship to our social world. Everything you and I say to each other here is situated in a social context, right? Everyone here has a very unusually high level of technical literacy. And so I'm not going to talk to you the way I would talk to my writer friends or my philosopher friends or my aunt who doesn't use the web much, right? We are constantly guessing about the amount of shared context we have with the person we're talking to and adjusting the way we communicate based on that. And people from different times or cultures in history will have less shared context with us. But a language model is not a person with a fixed identity. They know nothing about the cultural context of the person they're talking to, and they take on different characters depending on how you prompt them. So they are not speaking from one stable social position. But they do represent a very particular way of seeing the world because we trained them primarily on text on the web, which means they represent the generalized views of a majority English-speaking, like 95% of the training data is based on English, westernized population who have written a lot on Reddit and lived between about 1900 and 2024, which in the grand scheme of history and geography is like a very narrow slice of humanity, right? This obviously does not represent all human cultures and languages and ways of being. We have taken what was already a dominant way of seeing the world and we've generated even more content reinforcing that dominance. And we just don't have enough data about the lives of people far in the past or from cultures with less written content to represent them well in these models. So lastly, generated content lacks potential for human relationships, right? When you read someone else's writing online, it's often an invitation to connect with them. You can reply to their work, you can DM them, you can meet for coffee, you could become friends or intellectual sparring partners. I've had this happen with so many people. It's still a very possible thing on the web at the moment. But it's because there's someone on the other side of that work who I can have a real relationship with, right? Some of us might argue this is the entire point of the web. So this is a still from the film Her, which is kind of this canonical reference point for parasocial relationships with AI. In it, Joaquin Phoenix has a wonderful relationship with his personal AI, Samantha, and he talks to her all day, right, and like falls in love with her, and then she grows increasingly distant and bored of him because he's not smart enough. He's not as smart as an AI. And then he becomes very depressed and sad, and he's like alienated all the humans from his life. It's supposed to be a warning and not a suggestion. But there's a company called Replica who will give you an AI chatbot character to talk to, and it fails to consider the potentially unfulfilling outcomes of forming an emotional relationship with AI, because these agents are specifically designed to be friends or girlfriends. Obviously, they cannot fulfill you in all the ways that humans can, right? They cannot hug you, they cannot come to your birthday party, they cannot genuinely empathize with your pain, they cannot tell you about their experience grounded in the real world. So this generated content cannot lead to real, fulfilling human relationships. So that all sounds quite bad again, right? Deep breaths. Okay, we're going to talk about possible futures. I'm going to talk about futures I think could happen in the next 5 to 10 years. Anything beyond that is like too much fog of war, no idea. I'm going to say this is a non-comprehensive list, and it's also not mutually exclusive, so I think some of these trends could happen in parallel. Okay, first, I think we're going to have to spend a lot of time thinking about how to pass the reverse Turing test. So how will we prove that we are human on a web filled with sophisticated generative agents? The original Turing test, for people who don't know, is you would have one human talk to another human and a computer only through text, but they couldn't see each other. And then the computer, if it seemed plausibly human, that meant it passed the test. So people would design programs to try to make them seem very human. But now, on the new web, we, humans, are the ones under scrutiny, right? We have to prove that we are not actually a computer bot. In the short term, we can employ a bunch of kind of like nifty tricks to get around looking like an AI agent, right? We can use unusual jargon and terminology that might not be part of the training data. We can write in non-dominant languages that they don't perform as well on, like Welsh or Catalan. We could use just higher quality writing with more research and critical thinking. In the short term, these things distinguish you as a human. Okay, the next, I do apologize for this phrase, but it too perfectly captures my point. We are about to enter a phase of human centipede epistemology. Don't ask me to explain that, you can Google it later. The point is that if content from models becomes our source of truth, the way that we know things is simply that a language model once said them on the web. And then they're forever captured in the circular flow of information, just regurgitated forever. So instead of this current model, right, where the training data is at least based on real-world experience, We're going to use the text generated by these models to train new models, and that tenuous link to the real world becomes completely divorced from it. Someone recently noticed that if you asked Google if you could melt an egg, its smart summary at the top said yes. And it turned out it was pulling that fact from Quora, from their handy ChatGPT generation feature. And because Quora is considered a respectable website, it ranks very highly on Google. And it's not hard to imagine how all kinds of hallucinated answers could become canonical facts in the world through this kind of ridiculous feedback loop. This phenomenon is especially worrying for the scientific community, and they have very good reason to be. We're already seeing evidence that scientific researchers are using language models to directly write the papers that they're publishing. One paper, published last September in a real journal, included the phrase regenerate response at the end of a paragraph, which if you copy and paste text from ChatGPT badly, you will catch that button text in. Another one, again, published in a real journal on fossil fuel allocation, included the telltale phrase as an AI language model. It doesn't mean that the science in these papers is totally false, right? Like the tables and the figures here could be real. But without understanding how and why ChatGPT was used, we start to fear the worst case scenario, that these papers are being generated en masse without rigorous cross-checking. So these papers all got past reviewers and copy editors and were in real journals. And there's a real risk now that people will start creating scientific paper mills, right? They'll use generative models to write papers to claim things that haven't been proven in the real world. And these are usually findings that benefit the funder or the particular commercial interest that paid for the research, right? This takes the replication crisis to a whole new level. Okay, another possible future that seems most obvious is that we're all going to retreat much further into the cozy web. So as the dark forest grows larger, we will all go underground, and we will spend much less time on the open public web as it degrades in quality. We won't just use private channels like Discord and WhatsApp, but we'll start doing much more gatekeeping on those channels to prevent bots and automated agents getting in. We might have tests we have to pass before we're allowed in the WhatsApp group. Authors will increasingly put their content behind blocks and paywalls because they'll realize that putting it on the open web means it will be scraped by companies who are building generative models. Their ideas can then be taken out of context or show up in an incorrect warped hallucination, or someone else could train a model on their work and start writing in their voice. I think it's possible that the best quality writing and information could all go underground, leaving only poor quality generated material out in the open. We'll see more websites with lots of content on it blocking scraping or blocking access to their API. Reddit has already done this. Twitter, of course, did it by charging so much you would never pay for it. The web will not be open by default in this world. Next, we have what I call the meat space premium. That's what we're all engaging in here. I think we're going to begin to prefer and preference offline first interactions, or as I like to call it, meat space interactions. We will start to doubt all people online, right? The only way to confirm someone's humanity and that they're real is that you go meet them for a coffee or beer. And once you do, you can then confirm the humanity of everyone else you know with them and make a kind of trust network of who's actually real. I think some of the knock-on effects of this people will move back to cities and densely populated areas. They will prefer going to in-person events. There are obviously disadvantages to this. There are some people who cannot move to urban areas because they have disabilities or because they have young children or they're caregivers or they don't have the material means to. I think this sadly undoes a lot of the connective, equalizing power of the original web. A natural follow-on from this is, of course, put it on the blockchain. Blockchain's back. So some people have suggested that we can create on-chain authenticity checks for human-created content. So the idea here is you would go to some third party, you would shop in person, you'd say, hey, I'm a real human, here's my ID, and they'd give you a cryptographic key. Might not be totally tied to your identity, but then you can sign all your published content with it, and it links back to you. So this is a very real project called WorldCoin. This orb scans your eyeball to confirm your identity, and then it creates a unique hash credential you can use to sign your online content. And this project was actually helped be founded by OpenAI's Sam Altman. He probably knew what he was creating. He's now on the board, no longer running it, but very affiliated with this. I'm also expecting any day now that Elon's going to announce the new purple check that confirms your humanity. You just pay $30 a month, you tick a box that says I'm human, done. Okay, those are all a bit negative. I do think there is some hope in this future. We can fight fire with fire. I think it's reasonable to assume that we'll each have a set of personal language models that will help us filter and manage information on the web. I expect these to be baked into browsers, and they will help us do things like fact check and filter and summarize content and curate and suggest things to us. They could flag misinformation. We might at some point find it absurd that anyone would browse the raw web, like without their personal language model filtering through it, in the same way that very few of us would voluntarily go on the dark web today, like we know what's there and we don't want to see it. The filtered web, I think, becomes the default in this world. And Arc Browser, if anyone's seen this, on their iOS app are starting to do this. If you search for any topic, like Beyond Tellerrand, it can go find all the relevant websites related to that topic and summarize them together into a page for you that tells you all the key information. So here you can see it's found all the right speakers from this year, it's found up-to-date information, it's like pulled it from many different places, it creates this big summary. At the moment, it's only doing summarizing and filtering, but you can easily imagine this fact-checking and doing more for you. Okay, I'm almost done, but I want to leave you with one question here, which is which of these futures would you like to make happen? Generative AI is not inherently the destructive force here, but the way we're choosing to deploy it in the world is. The product decisions that expand the dark forestness of the web are the problem. Obviously, if you are personally working on a tool that enables people to churn out large volumes of random text without reflection and fact-checking and critical thinking, you maybe are the problem. Please stop. But what should we be building instead? I've tried to come up with 3 principles for building products with language models that will help guide us in the right direction. And these are to protect human agency, to treat models as reasoning tools and not sources of truth, and to augment our cognitive abilities rather than replacing them. So the first is that we need to protect human agency because the generative model system at the moment usually starts with a human prompt and it gets an agent to go off and make a bunch of stuff, right? But the locus of agency here is with the AI agent. Herein lies the path to self-destruction. This is what most AI safety researchers are really worried about. A more ideal form of this is that the human and the AI are collaborative partners, and they are doing things together in a short feedback loop. This is sometimes called the human-in-the-loop approach. The locus of agency remains with the human, and you give very limited power to the agent. It's much slower, but it's also much safer. This ties into principle 2, that we should treat models as tiny reasoning tools and not sources of truth. So rather than an LM being an oracle that we think will just deliver answers to us, we should instead start with our own reliable data sources. These could be scientific papers, they could be our own personal notes, they could be Wikipedia. And then we use language models to run very small, specialized tasks over them. These models are actually very good at doing things like summarizing content, extracting data from it, finding contradictions within text, comparing and contrasting claims. And we can always have kind of small, observable inputs and outputs to each of these little functions. So this doesn't treat any output here as a final publishable text. It treats it as a tool in a human's thinking and reasoning process. And lastly, we should augment our cognitive abilities rather than trying to replace them. So language models are very good at some things that humans are not good at. They can do really good search and discovery. They're very good at role-playing different characters and identities. They can rapidly organize and synthesize huge amounts of data. And they can turn fuzzy outputs into very structured inputs. And humans are very good at lots of things that language models are very bad at, right? Like checking claims against physical reality, like having long-term memory and coherence, like having embodied knowledge, understanding social context, and having emotional intelligence. So we should use models to do things that we can't do, not things that we are quite good at and quite happy doing. So we should leverage the best of both minds here. A lot of AI researchers use the alien minds metaphor to describe language models, like it's an alien mind we've discovered. But aliens always make me think of this, which is maybe appropriate for AI risk, but not a great collaborative partner in my mind. But I at least like the metaphor of this being like a new species. So Kate Darling, who's a robotics researcher at MIT, wrote this wonderful book called The New Breed that argues that we should think of robots as animals who are a companion species that are going to complement our skills. And I think this is the right metaphor to think about AI with. It's like they're an animal species we're collaborating with by respecting both their skills and our own and combining them. So that's the end. If you want to see slides to this talk on links and notes, you can again scan this QR code. Everything's up there. I am sadly still on Twitter as @Mappletons, and I'm sure a lot of people might have think I've said like one sacrilegious thing in this talk, so you can try to like main character me if you really want. Yeah, thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate it.